Hello? Hello? All right. This is the way to do social distancing. All right, I'm loving the new bike. So I bought the 790R in January and then immediately got locked down because I bought it just before I went to New Zealand. Last fall, I did a review for MotoTrek on the S Model 790. I gave it a big thumbs up. That opinion hasn't changed. This bike is phenomenal out here on the trails. And when it comes to an 800 class adventure bike, this bike's the shit. Let me tell you a couple of things I did. So this bike, one of the reasons that I chose the 790 was it didn't require me to do a lot of stuff to get it dialed in for me. And most importantly, I didn't feel I was going to add a lot of weight. So not only is it one of the best or the best bike in class for weight, it's also requires less extra protection. The skid plate down here around the tank is going to be very durable, and I'm convinced I don't need any additional protection. The skid plate out here behind that has a nice big open gap. So even if it's punctured, there's nothing really there that I can damage. The skid plate did need an upgrade. The skid plate is very lightweight, but most importantly, I've heard many riders complain about damaging exhaust. That's a problem. So I did go with the Black Dog CycleWorks skid plate, a significant increase in weight, but it's also the lowest part of the bike. Most importantly, it attaches to the frame, not to the motor. The suspension is just about perfect for me. The factory says, or KTM claims, the ideal weight for this suspension is 165 pounds to 180 pounds. That puts me right on the heavy side of that equation, but it also means it's just about perfect. I'm right around 20% sag on the front and around 25 on the rear. The factory setting comes with 0 additional preload on the front, so there's no way for me to take any more out or get more sag unless I change springs, or I get in there and see if I can change that preload adjuster. On the rear, it's pretty easy. I just dialed it out and we were good to go. So I'm pretty happy with that. The factory suspension settings for the damping and compression, I'm still playing around with those. I've had some time on the open road with it, played with it. Out here, I ended up dialing back just slightly on the compression and rebound on the front. On the rear, I ended up with less compression and just a tad more rebound. What I found was as I was coming up over rocks, logs, hills, that the back end had a tendency to hop up behind me. So I want to put a little softer compression on that because I'm not hitting a lot of whoop sections. That seemed to work out pretty well for me. I still need to play around with it to get it perfect, but I'm definitely on the right path. So suspension is stock other than that adjustment. The rider comfort positions on this are really quite good. The front end, the handlebars have 6 positions you can go into. So the upper triple has 3 different screw holes where you can move your upper triple mount or your handlebar mounts. And then the mounts themselves have a cradle that's offset, so you can go back or forward. So you end up with 6 positions. I finally settled on the furthest forward as far as the hole, and then I rotated the carrier so I sit back just slightly. So I'm second to the most farthest forward. The steering I'm not totally pleased with. I prefer to have it move back just slightly over the steering and then just flatten out the bars to more of a dirt bike bar. These bars have just enough bend to make me think more ATV than dirt bike. So they're a little bit narrow and a little bit back. In the future, I may get around to making that change. I kept the TourTech handguards that come OEM on it, and instead of changing that to a heavier item or spending money, I swapped out the levers. The levers are about 1 inch shorter, so it's now a 3-finger lever, and then also it has a breakaway feature. So if I hit the ground hard, the levers are going to bend up rather than snap. Tried it once or twice today just to see how things worked out. Levers worked out awesome. I went for heated grip and cruise control, and for night riding, the rigid lights that I tested for ADV Moto magazine. They started out on my F800 GS. They stayed with me through the Tiger, through the 1200 GS, and they're going to stay with me here. I want to keep my night riding ability intact. I did the Black Dog Cycle Work mounts for those lights. Keeps them nice, tight, and tucked. Today, no problems, nothing's hanging out there. I didn't even pick up any branches. That was a really nice choice for me. The other control I have up here is the Winch. The Winch is a Warren XT17. They no longer produce this. Again, it came with me from the F800 GS through the Tiger onto the 1200 and now onto this bike. And so you're gonna ask, Bret, why would you have a winch on your motorcycle? What's wrong with you? Well, I'll tell you why. There's two reasons I carry it. Number one, I do motorcycle adventure training. I train riders on adventure tours and during the adventure camps. And there are some times when people like to do silly things or get themselves stuck in places that they could normally ride through. The winch allows us the security that we can get it out even if the riders don't have enough strength to get that done. So we have used it before, but mostly for other riders that we come across, not the guys I train, because my goal is to teach them how not to do those silly things. The second reason I have it is because I don't have any friends. And so therefore, if I get stuck, I'm on my own. So I carry that winch as security to help me so I can go into places I wouldn't go otherwise. And it's a nice piece of insurance for me. The other adjustments on the bike, I have a cell phone mount up front. I just tap into the stock 12 volt outlet. I have a 12 volt power up on the column. KTM put power up underneath the dash and behind the seat that you can tap into. Each one has 10 watts of power. One is switched, one is constant power. So this allows me to have a power source for my GPS without having to tap into the CAN bus or worry about an extra fuse block that I tap into. The winch is tapped into the rear power source. The SAE cord I have down here works as a trickle charge to go straight to the battery, but I also use that one to charge my electronics. So I put a cord onto it, I run it into my bag, and then I just keep a 12 volt 110 converter in there. That helps keep my drone, my camera gear, everything charged up. That'll also fit into the luggage. I went with the Tkacs luggage racks. The reason I did this is I wanted to have a balance of weight. These are the only rack that I'm aware of that balances the offset of the exhaust to the left side. When you first put it on, you're going to see there's a huge gap behind that, and it does make the bike slightly wider on the left, but I like the weight balance. What I did to fill that weight or fill that extra gap was on the back side of the rack, I put 2 storage tubes, and each storage tube has its own purpose. The lower tube is loaded with all of my winch gear. So all my straps, power cords, everything I need to operate the winch are stored in that tube. The upper tube I leave empty, and that's so that I can bring a fresh bottle of wine with me when I do actual travel. The seat's pretty comfortable. I spent only about 200 miles at a time on it so far, mostly because of the COVID-19, but it is definitely not the least comfortable factory seat I've ever used. I have no immediate reason to replace this. The controls are set down just slightly, so I have a little bend when I'm riding on the road, a little bend when I'm off-road. That worked out well for setting those controls up. The shifter here is definitely too low from the factory, so I have that adjusted up just a little bit. When you look at the factory, the top of the foot peg here will run all the way across and usually ends up right around the top of the shifter. What I do is I raise it about 15 millimeters, and that puts the top of that foot peg right to the bottom edge of the shifter, and that seems to be just enough to make it feel perfect. So no misshifts, no awkward digging for that shifter with my boots because they're all big and bulky. The traction control and the electronics are what really sold me on this bike last fall, and I still absolutely love them. The off-road mode is perfect probably 90+% of the time. If you have an S model, unless you're doing really crazy things or you want to play around a lot, you're not missing a ton. It's very well dialed in. The rally mode lets me dial the traction control up or down, and I can pick which throttle mode or which throttle control I have, because they have a road, an off-road, and a rally mode for the throttle. The off-road mode is a little bit lazy. The street mode is fairly well connected and linear, and the rally mode is very quick and very instant on power. And I find that the road mode is my preference most of the time. However, when you use the off-road mode together as a package, it works very, very well. I've enjoyed that. Well, there you go, guys. That's it. The setup that I used on the bike, the creature comforts that I've added, the performance level of this bike is over the top. It's a lot of fun to have. Now keep in mind, if you're considering what bike you want, or if this is a bike that's on your radar, it is not a lightweight dirt bike. When you get it on the trails, this is still a significant motorcycle. It might be the lightest in class, but not by much. The old F800 GS is just about the same weight. It carries the weight a little bit different. This carries a little lower, very similar to a 1200 GS, not quite as low, but it is definitely a significant bike out there. The touring, I'm still a fan of the 1200 GS, the Super Tenere, the V-Stroms. Those are fantastic touring rigs. If you're talking about drifting and big open gravel roads, the Africa Twin, the 1290. But if you want to get on single track, if you want to get silly and try some very serious technical riding, the 790 won my heart. It's the bike that I'm going to play with and spend some time on. It'll be interesting to see what the other manufacturers do, or how the new 900 Tiger is going to perform out here. But I'm happy. It opened up my bank account. This bike rocks.